The crystal chandelier above cast dancing shadows across the imported Italian marble as Clara Sanchez climbed the grand staircase of the Roberts mansion, her arms laden with freshly laundered silk sheets. She had worked for the Roberts family for 3 years, arriving before dawn and leaving long after the sun had set, making their palatial home shine while her own modest apartment waited in darkness. As she approached the master suite, voices drifted through the partially open door, sharp, bright laughter that made something cold settle in her stomach. "Oh, Adelyn, you cannot be serious about having the help mingle with our guests," came the crystalline voice of Victoria Ashford, wife of a real estate magnate. "She probably thinks Cartier is a type of cheese and wouldn't know Louboutin from Target." Clara's feet stopped moving. Through the gap in the doorway, she could see her employer, Adelyn Roberts, perched on the edge of her velvet chaise like a sleek bird of prey. The woman's blonde hair was perfectly styled, her designer loungewear probably costing more than Clara's monthly rent. Surrounding her were 3 other women from her social circle, each draped in casual luxury that screamed old money. "I mean, what would she even wear?" laughed Margot Chin Hastings, heiress to a tech fortune, gesturing with a champagne flute that caught the afternoon light. "Does she even own anything that wasn't bought on a payment plan? The photographers would absolutely die. Can you imagine the captions? Billionaire's ball crashed by clearance rack Cinderella." Adelyn's lips curved into a smile that never reached her cold green eyes. She examined her manicured nails with studied indifference. "You know what would be absolutely delicious? Actually inviting her. Watching Clara Sanchez try to navigate a world she'll never belong in. Can you picture her face when she realizes she's completely out of her depth?" "Do it," urged Simone Beaumont, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels. "Give her a formal invitation to the Roberts annual charity ball. Let her think she's actually wanted. We can all watch her realize she's playing a game with rules she'll never understand. It'll be the most exquisite lesson in knowing one's place." Clara's hands tightened on the linens, her knuckles going pale. The expensive fabric suddenly felt heavy as stone. Adelyn stood, smoothing down her silk top with languid grace. "Fine. I'll invite Clara Sanchez to the most exclusive event of the social season. But we all know exactly how this ends. She'll either make some excuse about being sick or having a family emergency. They always have family emergencies, or if she actually shows up." Victoria asked, leaning forward with hungry anticipation. "Then we'll all get front row seats to watching her crumble under the weight of her own inadequacy," Adelyn replied, her voice dropping to something almost venomous. "One evening surrounded by people who were born to this world, and she'll finally understand that hard work and good intentions can't buy you breeding. She'll learn her lesson." The women erupted into bright, tinkling laughter, the kind of laughter that echoed through country clubs and yacht decks, casual and cruel. Clara felt the humiliation wash over her like ice water. She had worked in this house for 3 years, scrubbing their floors until they gleamed, pressing their designer clothes with careful precision, making their lives comfortable in 1,000 invisible ways. She had always been respectful, efficient, and dignified. She had even allowed herself to believe that despite their wealth and privilege, the Roberts family saw her as a human being. But now she knew the truth. To Adelyn Roberts and her circle of socialites, Clara was nothing more than entertainment. A poor black woman from the wrong neighborhood who dared to work in their gleaming mansion of privilege. An object lesson waiting to happen. "Should we take bets on whether she'll actually attend?" Margot asked, pulling out her phone. "I'll put down 5,000 that she makes an excuse. These people always know when they don't belong." "Make it 10, Victoria added. "There's absolutely no way she has the courage to walk into that ballroom. She knows what she is. What she'll always be." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at her to set down the linens, walk quietly down the servant staircase, collect her purse, and never return to this house of casual cruelty. But something else stirred inside her, a fierce pride inherited from her mother, who had cleaned offices to put Clara through college. A stubborn dignity that refused to be crushed. She thought of her mother's words, spoken during Clara's darkest moments. "They can take your money, Mija, but they can never take your self-respect. That belongs to you alone. Make them see you." Clara straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and knocked firmly on the master suite door. The laughter stopped instantly. "Come in," Adelyn called, her voice suddenly smooth as honey. Clara entered, her face composed and professional, giving no indication that she had heard a single word. She placed the linens on the designated chair and turned to leave. "Oh, Clara, wait a moment," Adelyn said, her smile bright and false. "I have something for you." She crossed to her escritoire and retrieved a heavy cream envelope with the Roberts family crest embossed in gold. Clara recognized it immediately. She had helped address 50 identical invitations just last week. "The Roberts annual charity ball is next Saturday," Adelyn said, extending the invitation with practiced grace. "And I realized we've never properly thanked you for all your hard work. I'd like you to attend as our guest." The other women watched with barely concealed smirks, their eyes glittering with anticipation. Clara looked at the invitation, then at Adelyn's perfectly composed face, then at the circle of wealthy women who expected her to shrink and stammer and refuse. The humiliation was a cold fist in her chest. But beneath it, something else was building, a quiet, burning resolve. Thank you, Mrs. Roberts, Clara said evenly, taking the invitation. I accept. Before we dive into this emotional journey, if you're enjoying these stories of unexpected love and redemption, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might just change how you see the world. Now, let's begin. The moment Clara reached her small apartment, the professional mask she'd worn all day finally shattered. She made it through the door, past the second-hand furniture and thrift store paintings, before her knees gave out. She sank onto the worn linoleum of her kitchen floor, the cream invitation still clutched in her trembling hand, and let the tears come. The humiliation crashed over her in waves. Asterisk a joke. You're nothing but a joke to them. Asterisk 3 years of arriving before dawn, of making their lives easier, of treating them with respect even when they barely acknowledged her presence, and this was what she meant to them. Entertainment. A lesson in knowing her place. Clara pressed her forehead against her knees, her mother's old words echoing through her mind. Asterisk they can take your money, Mija, but they can never take your self-respect. Asterisk. Her mother had cleaned offices in downtown Dallas for 20 years, coming home with aching feet and chemicals on her skin, but always with her head held high. She had put Clara through community college with that work, had taught her that dignity wasn't something that could be purchased or inherited, it was something you claimed for yourself, every single day. Clara lifted her head, looking at the invitation through tear-blurred eyes. The gold embossing caught the light from her small kitchen window. She could decline. Send a polite text, claim a family emergency, and never speak of this again. That's what they expected. What they were betting on. Or. Clara stood slowly, her legs steadying beneath her. She walked to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror, really looked. She saw what her mother had seen, a woman with her grandmother's strong cheekbones, her father's steady eyes, and a spine made of steel forged through generations of people who had survived worse than the cruelty of bored socialites. She pulled out her phone and dialed. Elena? It's Clara. I need your help. Her best friend, a makeup artist who worked with fashion photographers and understood the language of presentation, listened as Clara explained the situation. There was a long pause. Those entitled, Elena's voice was fire. Clara, we're going to make you look so stunning they'll choke on their champagne. What's your budget? I have $800 in savings. Then we hunt. Saturday morning. And Clara? You're going to walk into that ballroom like you bought the whole damn hotel. After they hung up, Clara picked up her phone again and opened her messages to Adelyn Roberts. Her fingers hovered over the screen for only a moment before she typed, Asterisk Mrs. Roberts, thank you for the invitation to the charity ball. I'm honored to accept. See you Saturday. Clara asterisk. She hit send. 3 floors above her, in his private study filled with first edition books and oil paintings, Elliot Roberts sat reviewing contracts when his wife's voice drifted through the open door, sharp with disbelief. She accepted. The maid actually accepted. Elliot looked up, curiosity flickering across his features. Through all his wife's petty schemes and social machinations, he'd learned to tune most of it out. But something in Adelyn's tone, a note of surprised uncertainty, made him set down his pen. For the first time in months, he found himself genuinely intrigued. Saturday morning found Clara and Elena standing outside Encore, a consignment boutique tucked into a diverse neighborhood 30 minutes from the gleaming towers of downtown. The shop's window displayed vintage Chanel beside contemporary designers, a democracy of elegance that didn't care about the original price tags. Listen to me, Elena said, gripping Clara's shoulders before they entered. Those women at the ball? They inherited their style. You're going to earn yours. There's a difference, and everyone in that room will feel it, even if they can't name it. Inside, the shop smelled of cedar and subtle perfume. Racks of gowns lined the walls like a garden of silk and satin, each one whispering possibilities. The owner, Mrs. Okoye, a Nigerian woman with silver-streaked locks and an eye that could assess fit and quality in seconds, approached with a knowing smile. You need something special, she said, not as a question. Something that makes a statement. The biggest statement of her life, Elena confirmed. For 90 minutes, they hunted. Clara tried on emerald green that washed her out, midnight blue that felt too safe, champagne gold that seemed to apologize for existing. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt like armor and art combined. Then Mrs. Okoye disappeared into the back room and emerged carrying something that made Elena inhale sharply. The dress was the color of confidence, a deep, unapologetic crimson that seemed to hold fire in its fabric. Floor-length with a fitted bodice and an elegant neckline that suggested sophistication rather than screamed for attention. The silhouette was timeless, the kind of dress that would look as stunning in photographs 50 years from now as it would under the chandeliers of the charity ball. Valentino, 3 seasons ago, Mrs. Okoye said quietly. Original owner wore it once to the opera. Retail was $6,500. For you? $500. Clara's hands trembled as she touched the fabric. It felt like possibility. In the dressing room, she slipped it on, and something shifted. The woman looking back at her in the mirror wasn't a maid pretending to be something she wasn't. She was Clara Sanchez, educated, dignified, and absolutely worthy of standing in any room. Oh my God, Elena breathed when Clara emerged. That's it. That's the one. They found strappy heels, elegant, understated, for $80, and a small clutch for $40. Mrs. Okoye threw in simple gold earrings that caught the light perfectly. Total, $620. Now we work on the rest, Elena said as they left the shop, dress carefully wrapped in tissue. The walk, the posture, the way you hold a champagne glass. Those women learned this stuff in boarding school and cotillion. You've got 6 days to master what they've had a lifetime to practice. Clara looked at her reflection in the shop window, the dress bag draped over her arm like a battle standard. Then we'd better get started, she said, her voice steady. Because I'm not just showing up to that ball, Elena. I'm going to make them remember that dignity isn't something you can buy, it's something you bring with you. Elena grinned. Now you're talking like the goddess you are. Elliot Roberts had built a tech empire by noticing details other people missed. So when Clara Sanchez walked through his home on Monday morning with her usual quiet efficiency, he noticed something different. She moved with the same professional grace, the same careful attention to her work, but there was something else now, a subtle straightening of her spine, a lift to her chin that hadn't been there before. She was polishing the banister in the main hallway when he paused on his way to his study, coffee cup in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Roberts," she said, her voice steady and respectful as always. "Good morning, Clara." He watched as she worked, her movements precise and unhurried. She didn't fidget or look away. She simply met his gaze with calm professionalism before returning to her task. In his private library, surrounded by first editions and the leather-bound silence of old money, Elliot found himself unable to focus on the quarterly reports spread across his mahogany desk. Instead, he opened his laptop and navigated to the household employee files, something he hadn't looked at in years. That was Adelyn's domain, or so he'd convinced himself. Clara Sanchez's file opened on his screen. Bachelor's degree in English literature from the University of Texas at Dallas. Graduated summa cum laude. Previous employment, executive assistant at a mid-sized marketing firm. References, exceptional. She'd been with them for 3 years, never missing a day, never filing a complaint. Her performance reviews, the few that Adelyn had bothered to complete, were flawless. Elliot leaned back in his chair, uncomfortable knot forming in his chest. This wasn't just the help. This was an educated, accomplished woman who cleaned his floors because she needed the work, not because it was all she was capable of doing. He thought of the conversation he'd overheard 2 days ago, Adelyn and her friends giggling in the sunroom about their little social experiment. The charity ball invitation. The bets on whether Clara would show up. The gleeful anticipation of watching her humiliation. At the time, he'd said nothing. He'd walked past, pretending not to hear, the way he'd been pretending not to see Adelyn's cruelty for years. It was easier than confronting the truth about the woman he'd married, a woman whose beauty and social connections had blinded him to the ugliness underneath. Adelyn appeared in his doorway now, dressed in ivory cashmere, her phone in hand. "Darling, I need you to confirm your speech for Saturday. The caterers need final numbers, and Chelsea wants to know if." "Why did you invite Clara to the ball?" Elliot asked quietly. Adelyn blinked, her expression shifting to practiced innocence. "I thought it would be nice. A gesture of appreciation for her hard work." "Don't lie to me, Adelyn." A flash of irritation crossed her perfect features. "Oh, for God's sake, Elliot. It's harmless fun. She'll probably make an excuse anyway. And if she doesn't, well, it might be good for her to see how the other half lives. A little perspective never hurt anyone." Elliot looked at his wife, really looked at her, and felt a wave of something close to disgust. When had he become the kind of man who tolerated this? Who enabled it through his silence? "That woman has a degree from UT Dallas," he said. "She graduated summa cum laude." Adelyn's laugh was light and dismissive. "Then she should have made better choices, shouldn't she? Education doesn't equal class, darling. You of all people should know that." She left, her heels clicking on the marble, and Elliot sat alone in his library, the weight of his own complicity settling on his shoulders like chains. For the first time in years, he felt deeply ashamed. Clara's small apartment had become a war room. On Tuesday evening, Elena arrived with a portable full-length mirror and a ruthless eye for detail. She set a champagne flute, borrowed from her photographer boss, on Clara's coffee table and pointed. "Pick it up." "No, not like that. Stem, always the stem. Now hold it like it's not the first time you've touched crystal that costs more than your rent." Clara adjusted her grip, feeling ridiculous in her worn yoga pants and tank top. But Elena was relentless. Again. Walked to the window and back. Shoulders down, chin level. "You're not trying to impress anyone, you already belong there. That's the energy. Own the space." For 2 hours, Clara walked the length of her small living room until the movement became muscle memory. Heel to toe, smooth and unhurried, like she had all the time in the world and nowhere more important to be. Wednesday night, Elena brought her makeup kit. They'll be wearing full glam, heavy contouring, the works. You're going to do the opposite. Minimal, elegant, sophisticated. Let your natural beauty do the talking. Under Elena's guidance, Clara learned the art of restraint, a subtle enhancement of her features rather than a mask. Soft definition on her eyes, a nude lip that suggested confidence rather than demanded attention, a hint of luminizer that caught the light. You're not competing with them, Elena reminded her. You're playing a completely different game. Thursday and Friday were for the mind. Clara spread her laptop and a stack of library books across her kitchen table, systematically researching the topics that would dominate cocktail conversation at a high society charity event. She read about the current political landscape, the recent economic summit, the emerging markets in sustainable technology. She studied the charity itself, a children's literacy foundation, and memorized statistics about educational access and literacy rates in underserved communities. She watched YouTube videos of TED Talks by economists and policymakers, absorbing not just their content but their delivery, the pauses, the confident assertions, the way they held space with their words. By Friday night, Clara could discuss wealth inequality with the same ease that Adelyn's friends discussed their vacation homes. She could speak knowledgeably about philanthropic impact metrics, about the difference between charity and systemic change, about literature and art and the responsibility of privilege. Elena arrived for a final rehearsal, and Clara put it all together. The red dress, now perfectly altered to fit her like it had been designed for her body. The walk, the posture, the makeup. She stood in her small apartment, transformed. Now say something smart, Elena instructed, holding up her phone to record. Clara lifted her chin, champagne glass held with casual grace. True philanthropy isn't about writing checks to ease your conscience. It's about leveraging your privilege to dismantle the systems that created inequality in the first place. Elena lowered her phone, eyes shining. Clara Sanchez, you are going to destroy them. Clara looked at herself in the mirror, not a maid pretending to be something she wasn't, but a woman fully inhabiting her own worth. No, she said quietly. I'm going to show them exactly who I've always been. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered like a jewel box. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, illuminating designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos, champagne towers and ice sculptures shaped like swans. The city's elite mingled beneath gilded ceilings, their laughter and conversation creating a symphony of privilege that had played in rooms like this for generations. Adelyn Roberts stood near the center of it all, resplendent in a black floor-length gown that had been featured in Vogue. She held court with Victoria, Margot, and Simone, each woman draped in couture and confidence, champagne flutes in hand. They'd been checking the entrance every few minutes, anticipation brightening their perfectly made-up faces. She's not coming, Victoria said with barely concealed disappointment. It's already 8:30. I told you, Margot added. These people know when they're out of their depth. Adelyn smiled, though something flickered behind her eyes, relief mixed with the faintest trace of deflation. The entertainment she'd orchestrated wasn't going to materialize after all. Then the room shifted. It was subtle at first, a ripple of awareness moving through the crowd near the entrance, conversations pausing mid-sentence, heads turning. The string quartet continued playing, but somehow the music seemed to fade into the background. Clara Sanchez stood at the top of the grand staircase. The red dress moved with her like liquid fire, the color so bold and unapologetic it commanded attention without begging for it. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo that showed off the graceful line of her neck and the simple gold earrings that caught the chandelier light. Her makeup was flawless, understated and sophisticated, enhancing rather than masking. She wore her dignity like a second skin. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She simply began her descent, each step measured and confident, her hand resting lightly on the banister with the ease of someone who belonged exactly where she was. The ballroom fell into a hush. Adelyn's champagne flute stopped halfway to her lips, her expression frozen somewhere between shock and fury. Beside her, Victoria's mouth had actually fallen open. Margot and Simone stood rigid, their carefully practiced social masks cracking. That's not possible, Adelyn breathed. That's not, she can't. But Clara was already moving through the crowd, her posture impeccable, a serene half-smile on her lips. People parted for her instinctively, their gazes following her progress across the ballroom floor. Across the room, Elliot Roberts had been mid-conversation with a senator when he felt the energy shift. He turned toward the entrance and his world tilted on its axis. The woman descending the staircase wasn't his maid. She was something else entirely, a force of nature wrapped in crimson silk, carrying herself with a grace and self-possession that made every other person in the room fade into background noise. His wife's maid. Clara Sanchez. The woman whose file he'd studied, whose quiet dignity he'd observed all week. She was the most captivating person he had ever seen. The realization hit him with physical force. In a room full of people who had been born to wealth and privilege, who had been groomed for moments like this since childhood, this woman, who had earned every ounce of her presence through sheer force of character, outshone them all. And his wife had invited her here to be humiliated. Elliot felt shame burn through him like acid, followed immediately by something else. Fascination, admiration, and the sudden, absolute certainty that nothing about this evening was going to go the way Adelyn had planned. Adelyn recovered her composure with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime controlling narratives. She drained her champagne, handed the empty flute to a passing waiter, and straightened her shoulders. If Clara thought showing up in a decent dress would be enough, she was about to learn otherwise. Come on, Adelyn murmured to her friends, her voice tight. Let's remind her what league she's actually in. They found Clara near the hors d'oeuvres table, speaking politely with an older couple about the Literary Foundation's recent expansion into rural communities. Adelyn approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her entourage flanking her like a designer-clad firing squad. "Clara. What a surprise to see you here," Adelyn said, her voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. You look like you tried very hard." "How sweet." Clara turned, her expression serene. "Mrs. Roberts. Thank you again for the invitation." Of course. Adelyn's smile sharpened. "You know, I was just having the most fascinating conversation with the Vanderbilt Foundation director about the efficacy of philanthropic interventions in addressing systemic poverty. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Clara. Since you're here as our guest, you must have opinions on the true purpose of charity events like this one." It was a trap, carefully baited. The question was complex enough to require nuanced understanding of economic theory and social policy. Topics Adelyn assumed someone who cleaned houses for a living couldn't possibly discuss with any sophistication. The small crowd that had gathered would witness Clara stumble, and the natural order would be restored. Clara met Adelyn's eyes for a long moment, then took a delicate sip of her champagne. When she spoke, her voice was clear and measured, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. "That's an important question, Mrs. Roberts. I think the challenge with traditional philanthropy is that it often treats symptoms rather than causes. Writing a check to a literacy foundation is meaningful, certainly, but if we're not simultaneously advocating for equitable school funding, addressing food insecurity that impacts childhood development, and dismantling the structural barriers that create educational deserts in the first place, then we're essentially performing charity theater. We feel good, the photos look beautiful, but the systems that create inequality remain intact." The circle of listeners had grown. A woman in emerald silk, someone Clara recognized from the foundation's board, leaned in with obvious interest. Clara continued, her tone respectful but unwavering. "True philanthropy, I believe, requires us to be uncomfortable. It means using our privilege, whether that's wealth, access, or platform, to amplify marginalized voices and support grassroots organizations that are actually doing the work of systemic change. It means asking ourselves if we're helping, or if we're just helping ourselves feel better about an unjust status quo." The silence that followed was profound. Adelyn's face had gone pale beneath her makeup, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Victoria and Margot exchanged uncomfortable glances. The woman in emerald smiled. "That's the most intelligent thing I've heard all evening. I'm Margaret Chun, Foundation Board Chair. And you are?" "Clara Sanchez," Clara said, extending her hand with easy grace. "Well, Ms. Sanchez, I'd love to continue this conversation. We need more voices like yours in these spaces." As Margaret drew Clara away into a deeper discussion, Adelyn stood frozen, her carefully planned humiliation dissolving like sugar in rain. By 10 o'clock, Clara had become the unexpected center of gravity in the ballroom. She stood in a small circle that included Margaret Chun, a prominent venture capitalist, and a professor from Columbia who specialized in economic inequality. Their conversation was animated, genuine, the kind of intellectual exchange that was supposed to happen at events like this but rarely did beneath the performance of wealth. Adelyn watched from across the room, her fury building with each passing moment. She drained 3 glasses of champagne, her carefully maintained composure fraying at the edges. Victoria and Margot tried to distract her with gossip, but Adelyn's eyes kept returning to Clara, to the way people leaned in when she spoke, to the respect in their expressions. "This is ridiculous," Adelyn hissed. "She's making a mockery of everything." "Maybe we should just let it go," Simone suggested quietly, looking uncomfortable. "She's actually being quite gracious." "Let it go." Adelyn's voice rose sharply, drawing glances from nearby guests. "She's the help, Simone. The help. And everyone's treating her like she's some sort of honored guest instead of someone who should be in the back cleaning up after us." The conversations around them began to falter, a widening circle of awareness spreading through the ballroom. Adelyn raised her voice further, champagne sloshing in her glass. "I mean, really, it's very generous of everyone to humor her, but let's not forget she's only here because I felt sorry for her. It's important to remember one's place, don't you think? The staff should be serving, not mingling like they belong with actual society." The ballroom went silent. Clara, 20 feet away, stood perfectly still, her expression carefully neutral even as something flickered in her eyes, not shame, but a deep, bone-tired recognition of a cruelty she'd faced her entire life. Elliot Roberts had been standing near the bar, watching his wife's performance with mounting horror. He'd observed Clara all evening, her grace, her intelligence, the way she turned every attempt at humiliation into an exhibition of quiet strength. And he'd watched Adelyn deteriorate from calculated malice into something ugly and desperate. This was the moment. The one he'd been avoiding for years. The one that would cost him his comfortable complacency and force him to choose what kind of man he actually was. He set down his glass and walked into the center of the ballroom, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The crowd parted for him instinctively. He was Elliot Roberts, after all, the man whose name was on the invitation, whose wealth funded half the causes in this room. "Adelyn." His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "That's enough." His wife turned to him, surprise and irritation flashing across her face. "Elliot, I'm simply stating the obvious." "No." He stepped closer, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. You're not. You need to stop talking. Right now. Adelyn's eyes widened, genuine shock replacing her anger. In 15 years of marriage, Elliot had never contradicted her publicly. Had never challenged her, never made her look anything less than perfect in front of their social circle. But as he looked at her now, at the casual cruelty in her eyes, the entitled certainty that she had the right to humiliate another human being for sport, he felt nothing but contempt for the man he'd become by staying silent. Everyone here needs to know something, Elliot said, his voice steady and clear. And then I have something to say to Ms. Sanchez. Elliot turned to face the assembled crowd, the city's most powerful and privileged, people he'd known for decades, people whose opinions had once mattered to him. Now, standing in the center of the ballroom with every eye fixed on him, he felt nothing but clarity. My wife invited Clara Sanchez to this event as a joke, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. A cruel, calculated attempt to humiliate her in front of all of you. It was meant to be entertainment, a spectacle of watching someone from a different social class stumble and fail, to remind her of what my wife and her friends consider to be her place. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Adelyn's face drained of color. Elliot, what are you? I knew about it, he continued, cutting her off. I heard you and your friends planning it, laughing about it, placing bets on whether she'd even show up. And I said nothing. I did nothing. For that, I am profoundly ashamed. He turned to look at Clara, who stood motionless, her dignity intact even as every person in the room stared at her. Her eyes met his, not with gratitude, but with a quiet strength that made him feel even smaller. What my wife failed to understand, Elliot said, turning back to the crowd, is that Clara Sanchez has a bachelor's degree in English literature from UT Dallas, where she graduated summa cum laude. She's worked for our family for 3 years with perfect professionalism, never missing a day, never complaining, even when treated with the kind of casual disrespect that should shame us all. She came here tonight knowing exactly what my wife intended, and she came anyway, not to prove she could fit into our world, but to prove that she never needed our approval in the first place. Margaret Chun nodded slowly, her expression hardening as she looked at Adelyn with open disdain. Others in the crowd began whispering, and not one of those whispers was sympathetic. Elliot's voice grew stronger. I've spent this entire evening watching Ms. Sanchez demonstrate more grace, intelligence, and genuine character than I've seen in this ballroom in 15 years of attending these events. She engaged in meaningful conversation about systemic poverty and educational equity while the rest of us performed philanthropy. She treated everyone with respect even knowing she was invited here to be mocked. He turned to Adelyn, his wife, and felt nothing but exhausted contempt. You and your friends thought you were teaching her a lesson about knowing her place. But the only thing tonight has taught us is that cruelty and prejudice are not elevated by expensive dresses and inherited wealth. They remain exactly what they are, pathetic, small, and unforgivable. Adelyn's hand trembled, her champagne glass slipping from her fingers and shattering on the marble floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Victoria and Margot had backed away from her, their faces carefully blank, already calculating their social distance from the scandal. Elliot, you're humiliating me, Adelyn whispered, her voice breaking. No, he said quietly. You humiliated yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows it. He crossed the ballroom to where Clara stood, the crowd parting like water. When he reached her, he extended his hand. Ms. Sanchez, on behalf of my family, I apologize. You deserved better. You deserved respect. Clara looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then at his face. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and clear. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. But I didn't come here for your family's respect. I came here for my own. She shook his hand once, firmly, then turned and walked toward the exit, her red dress flowing behind her like a banner, her head held impossibly high. The crowd watched her leave in absolute silence, the only person in the room who had truly won. Clara found the balcony overlooking the city almost by instinct, needing air and space away from the stares and whispers. The night was cool, the skyline glittering below like a constellation brought to earth. She gripped the marble railing, her hands trembling now that no one could see, the adrenaline of the evening finally catching up with her. She heard footsteps behind her but didn't turn. Ms. Sanchez. Elliot's voice was quiet, careful. May I speak with you? You've said enough for one evening, Mr. Roberts. I know. And it wasn't nearly enough. He moved to stand beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, his hands in his pockets. What I said in there, it was true, but it was also inadequate. I let my wife's cruelty happen under my own roof. I heard her planning to humiliate you and I did nothing. That makes me complicit. Clara finally looked at him. In the moonlight, he looked older, tired, stripped of the easy confidence that wealth usually provided. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you deserve to hear it. And because watching you tonight, the way you carried yourself, the way you refused to be diminished, it made me realize how empty my own life has become. I've spent 15 years in a marriage built on appearances, surrounding myself with people who measure worth by bank accounts and zip codes. I convinced myself that was just how the world worked. He turned to face her fully. But you showed me something different. You showed me that dignity isn't inherited or purchased. That character matters more than pedigree. That I've been living a very small life in a very big house. Clara studied his face, searching for manipulation or another angle. She found only exhaustion and something that looked like genuine remorse. What are you going to do about it? She asked. I filed for divorce this morning, he said simply. My lawyers are drawing up the papers. Adelyn will be well provided for, but we're done. We should have been done years ago. 3 months later, Clara stood in a renovated brownstone in a neighborhood that straddled the divide between old wealth and working-class resilience. The sign outside read the Sanchez-Roberts Foundation, Educational Equity Through Systemic Change. Inside, the walls were covered with maps of underserved school districts, partnership proposals with grassroots organizations, and photographs of students whose lives they were working to transform. Elliot emerged from his office, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, looking more alive than she'd ever seen him in the mansion. The board approved the expansion, he said, genuine excitement in his voice. We can launch the mentorship program in 6 new cities. Clara smiled, feeling the weight of purpose settle around her shoulders like a familiar coat. This partnership had surprised them both, built on mutual respect, shared vision, and a growing affection that felt nothing like the superficial relationships that had defined both their pasts. They stood together at the window overlooking the city, no longer separated by the artificial boundaries of class and circumstance. 2 people who had found each other across a divide, who had chosen to build something meaningful from the wreckage of old assumptions. Thank you, Elliot said quietly, for showing me what matters. Clara took his hand. Thank you for finally seeing it. Below them, the city hummed with possibility, a world they were learning to reshape together, one act of genuine dignity at a time.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.